Hi, I'm Ben Levy, Assistant Professor of Music Theory here at Arizona State University. A lot of my research has to do with composers after the Second World War who are expanding the idea of music beyond sections determined by pitch, by keys, by the melodic or thematic elements in music, who are dealing more with texture and timbre as ways of shaping music, of ways of articulating form. One of these figures at the forefront of this is Iannis Xenakis. And I'm particularly excited that in April we'll have a series of concerts devoted to Xenakis' music. Xenakis worked not only as a composer, but also as an architect. And this kind of thinking in terms of visual shapes is very, very much a part of his modus operandi. He, in his book Formalized Music, which we have here an example of a very complicated shape that he determined in part using probability theory, and then translated into his orchestral piece, Pithapracta. A piece that I've looked at a little more closely is his electronic work, Mycenae Alpha. Mycenae Alpha was the first piece where he used the UPIC graphic software system to make such translations between visual shapes and sound. In this example, you can see Xenakis' notation on the bottom half. Each time moves from left to right, pitch is arranged from low to high, just as in a normal score. Above Xenakis' notation, though, we have a spectrograph which I've generated that shows all of the overtones that are accompanying Xenakis' material. Xenakis could load any waveform that he wanted and get any kind of timbre that he wanted. It seems to me like in this piece, Xenakis is using timbre, using these very complicated waveforms. You can tell there's a lot more going on in the spectrograph than there is in the graphic notation. And these noisier sounds, these more complicated textures, are often used to interrupt the linear sense of the music, to disrupt any melodies, any progressions of scales from low to high, anything you can follow with your ear like that into something a bit noisier, something a bit more disruptive, something a little bit disconnected. And that's a way of generating tension, generating interest, making the music more dynamic. I think that it's not too fanciful to read Xenakis' personal story into a similar line of interpretation. He was exiled from Greece for many years after the war because of his involvement in a resistance movement. And Mycenae Alpha was his homecoming to Greece after several decades. When he got back home to Greece, he talks about all of the different places, all of the different locations that he remembers from his youth, that he knows about from history, from mythology. Mycenae Alpha was actually held at the ruins of an ancient city in Greece, Mycenae, where Agamemnon was the ruler during the Trojan War, so it has all kinds of associations to mythology, to the ancient epics and plays. And this idea that any point can have multiple resonances, different directions, any linear connection that Xenakis may have wanted to perceive in his own life story ends up being disrupted in the same way that the lines of his music are. That's what makes his life story so interesting. And it's a situation that's very familiar for all of us. Maybe we associate two things across time even though there's not a linear connection. We associate ourselves with particular themes of literature even though the events of that story don't exactly fit our own. It's a common situation, and something that I think Xenakis is trying to express and finding through his art the best means to articulate that expression.